that will make you doubt everything you know. There is a quiet horror buried beneath every thought you've ever had. Not the horror of violence or monsters, but something far worse. The creeping suspicion that reality itself might be lying to you. That everything you believe, every rule you trust, every memory you hold sacred, may be constructed on a foundation as unstable as smoke. This isn't the kind of dread that jumps out of a dark alley. It's the dread that emerges when the lights are on and you realize that even light cannot be trusted. You were taught to see the world as logical, consistent, measurable. But what if those systems of understanding were cages? Elegant illusions designed not to reveal the truth, but to hide it. You were born into a world that feels stable because instability would drive the mind to madness. The brain does not crave truth. It craves coherence, patterns, predictability. It wants to believe that 2 + 2 always equals 4, that the sun will rise because it rose yesterday, that your thoughts are your own and not whispers from a deeper algorithm you can't detect. But we are going to unwind that, gently at first, then violently. This is not a journey into philosophy as it is taught in books or schools. This is a descent, a deliberate plunge into the dark architecture of logic's limits. You will not be given a safe path or a comforting resolution. There will be no gods here, no benevolent universe watching over you, no redemption arc waiting at the final page. There will only be questions that open wider the more you stare into them. Paradoxes that tear at the seams of your understanding like invisible claws. Thoughts so intrusive they feel as though they did not come from your mind, but from somewhere beneath it. Before we begin, understand this. Every paradox you encounter will leave something behind. Not a simple answer or a satisfying twist, but a splinter in your perception. You may try to remove it. You may try to forget it. But the best paradoxes are like infections. They spread. They replicate in silence, colonizing the very framework you use to distinguish sense from nonsense. Some you'll dismiss immediately, calling them clever or impractical. Others will haunt you for days, weeks, years, waiting for quiet moments to re-emerge and whisper, "What if none of this makes sense?" We start with the smallest cracks, the childlike puzzles that seem innocuous, even charming. But every one of them conceals a trapdoor. Each is a loose thread in the tapestry of logic, and if you pull too hard, the whole world begins to unravel. And you will pull. You won't be able to resist. Because there is a strange pleasure in mental vertigo, in feeling the floor drop out from beneath your understanding. Because doubt, once it takes root, becomes addictive. And you, dear listener, are about to overdose. There will be moments where you feel certain that you've understood the point, that you've solved the puzzle. You'll feel the satisfying click of a mental lock falling open. But beware. Many of these paradoxes are recursive. Their answers lead back into themselves. Like an Escher staircase you didn't realize you were climbing. Others mutate as you watch them, revealing a second layer, a third, until the original question disappears altogether, leaving only a void where certainty used to be. You may begin to distrust your senses. You may begin to distrust your memory, your reasoning, your own consciousness. This is not a failure. This is the point. Because the mind was never designed to fully comprehend itself. It is a flashlight trying to illuminate its own beam, a mirror trying to reflect itself in darkness. And yet we try. We build languages, metaphors, and mathematical proofs to wrap the infinite in symbols. We construct gods out of confusion and reason out of chaos. But sometimes, just sometimes, the confusion leaks through. That's what this script is, a controlled leak. A descent into the hidden fractures of logic, perception, identity. We will talk about time that swallows itself, about choices that were never choices, about consciousness that isn't yours and never was. We'll explore paradoxes that collapse the difference between cause and effect, between existence and non-existence, between real and simulation. Some will come dressed as simple riddles. Others will feel like viruses, consuming everything you thought was solid. You will want to look away, and you won't. You can't. The mind, once infected by contradiction, will always seek resolution, even when resolution is impossible. And yet, paradoxically, you'll feel alive. Because the edge of understanding is where awareness sharpens. When the walls crumble, when nothing is certain, you become something closer to awake. Not comfortable, not safe, but aware. You will walk through these paradoxes as if through a mirror maze with no exit. But that's not failure, that's the destination. The trap is not that the answers are hidden. The trap is thinking answers exist at all. So now take a breath, though it won't help. Empty your expectations, though they'll scream to be heard. Step into the first paradox not as a seeker of truth, but as a willing participant in your own unmaking. For if you are lucky, or perhaps unlucky, you will never see the world the same way again. Are you ready to lose your mind, or worse? Discoveries never truly belong to you. Simple yet disturbing. Imagine a village. It's quiet, small, and self-contained, untouched by the outside world. Every man in the village is clean-shaven, except those who shave themselves. For the task of shaving the men who do not shave themselves belongs to one man, the village barber. He has one rule, enforced with perfect discipline. He shaves only those men who do not shave themselves. He never shaves a man who shaves himself. That is his duty, his code, the logical linchpin of the town's order. But one day, someone asks a question that halts the entire village in silence, like a power outage snapping reality into darkness. Does the barber shave himself? You've likely heard this one before. Bertrand Russell's paradox. Simple on the surface, almost laughable. A children's riddle with a philosopher's punchline. If the barber shaves himself, he violates his rule. He only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he does not shave himself, then by his rule, he must shave himself. A contradiction born of logic trying to eat its own tail. It's a closed loop that cannot resolve. A clean and fatal fracture in what appears to be a simple system. You can't fix it by flipping the answer. Both yes and no break the machine. And yet the real horror isn't in the barber. It's in how easily this happens, how just a few lines of simple rules collapse the entire structure of reason. You didn't need quantum physics or multidimensional calculus to reach the void, just shaving habits. This paradox is a scalpel, not because of its size, but because of its precision. It reveals a deeper sickness that infects every logical system we take for granted. That once you allow self-reference, you open the door to contradiction. That the mind, which can reflect on itself, question itself, and attempt to contain itself within itself, is always one thought away from annihilating its own coherence. You can try to cheat your way out. Maybe the barber doesn't exist. Maybe the village doesn't. But then you're not solving the paradox. You're running from it. The barber is not a man. He's a metaphor for rules, for language, for systems that attempt to define themselves from within. And wherever you have those things, mathematics, logic, governance, identity, you will eventually meet a barber waiting in the dark, sharpening a contradiction. The discomfort you feel now is subtle, a soft nausea, a cognitive glitch. That's what makes it effective. You might dismiss it as clever wordplay, but that impulse is a defense mechanism. The truth is, the moment a system turns inward, asks itself to define itself, govern itself, explain itself, it becomes unstable. And you are a system. Your sense of self is self-referential. You are both observer and observed, narrator and character, judge and defendant. And yet you trust that what you are makes sense. That there's a you beneath all this that isn't just a recursive loop whispering its own name until it believes it's real. This is not an isolated anomaly. It is a warning sign, a microfracture in the glass of reality. Russell's paradox infected the foundations of mathematics and logic in the 20th century. It forced entire systems of formal logic to be rewritten. It revealed that even in pure abstraction, where numbers and symbols should obey, Chaos waits behind the curtain. The paradox is not merely an error, it is a mirror reflecting the limits of precision itself. Zoom out. What happens when language, the medium by which you think, turns on itself? Definitions referencing definitions, meanings spiraling inward until words collapse into contradiction. What happens when morality does the same? Or identity? Can a person forgive themselves if they are both the sinner and the saint? Can a system of justice judge itself as just? These are not abstract problems, they're structural flaws in the scaffolding of thought. And the more you poke, the more you see. These cracks are everywhere. Russell's barber doesn't live in a village. He lives in your mind. In every attempt to draw a line and say, this belongs here and this belongs there, he is waiting to ask, but what if the line crosses itself? He is present in your memories when you try to remember whether you really remember something or just remember remembering. He is there when you wonder if your thoughts are your own or just echoes programmed by something deeper. Society, biology, trauma. Who is shaving whom? Even in computation, the most precise tool we've built, this ghost haunts us. Try to build a program that analyzes all programs and determines whether they will halt or run forever. Congratulations, you've just created a version of the barber. The halting problem, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, the foundations of mathematical logic. These are all shadows cast by the same paradox. That complete self-containment is impossible. That truth, when it tries to account for itself, collapses. You cannot fully explain a system using only the rules inside that system. You must step outside it, but there may be no outside to step into. So here's where we stand. A barber who cannot shave himself without violating the logic that makes him a barber. A mind that cannot reflect on itself without risking madness. A universe that, when asked to define itself, responds only with silence or contradiction. That's where it starts, a riddle about razors, and you're already staring into the void. And so we ask, if the foundation of logic itself can fall apart with such a simple contradiction, what else might crumble under scrutiny? How many of your thoughts are barbers, pretending they have rules? And if a mind must contain itself to exist, what happens when it finally catches up with its own reflection? The ship that never arrives. Picture a ship at sea. It glides forward with perfect grace, timeless, steady, unstoppable. Now imagine that ship sailing toward a distant shore. You watch it approach, day by day, hour by hour. But here's the trap. Before it can reach the shore, it must first reach the halfway point. And before it reaches that, it must reach half of that. Again and again, the distances divide. Every step forward is broken into infinite fragments. No matter how close the ship gets, there's always another halfway point to cross. 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 halves stacked between it and its destination. And so the ship never arrives. This is Zeno's dichotomy paradox, and its infection runs deeper than you might suspect. On the surface, it's a mathematical curiosity, a riddle solved by calculus, long buried beneath integrals and limits. But we're not here for neat resolutions. We're here to examine the wound beneath the solution, because even if the math adds up, your mind still stutters when it tries to imagine infinity being crossed. What does it mean to move through endless steps? What does it mean to ever arrive? You blink, shrug, and say, "Of course the ship arrives. I've seen ships arrive. This is just a trick." But is it? Or is it a glitch in the way we perceive motion, time, and continuity? Things we assume to be smooth and uninterrupted. If reality is continuous, how can anything move at all? How can we traverse infinite steps in finite time? And if reality is not continuous, if it's made of discrete moments, indivisible frames like film cells, then what moves us from one frame to the next? What force bridges the gaps, animates the static? Now walk it inward. Your thoughts are not whole. They too are segments stitched together, conscious blips flickering across the theatre of your awareness. Between every thought is a pause, however small, but you don't notice it. Your mind papers over the gaps, pretending continuity. You believe you are a stream, but what if you're a flipbook? What if you are a sequence of frames that only feels alive because the projector is too fast to show the stillness between them? If motion itself is built on paradox, then so is existence. Because existing requires time, and time requires movement, and movement, if Zeno is right, requires the impossible, crossing an infinity. And you do it constantly. Every time you reach for a glass, or take a breath, or finish this sentence, you have crossed something that cannot be crossed. You have moved when motion should be mathematically impossible. You have arrived when arrival should never happen. So the question slithers in. Is anything truly moving at all? Or are we just points, snapshots of a world that feels in motion, because we are inside the illusion, unable to see the stillness? Are we already at every point in time simultaneously, but experiencing it sequentially, like reading one word at a time from a book already written? Does the ship ever arrive, or has it always been there, waiting for us to realize that the journey was an illusion built by perception? Zeno's trap isn't just about motion, it's about trust. You trust that when you reach out your hand, it will connect with the object you desire. That action leads to reaction. That cause leads to effect. But what if that's just a rendering trick, like a video game hiding the next frame until the player gets close enough? What if reality only simulates motion because you expect it to? What if you've never really moved at all? Now extend this thought. If the future is infinitely far away in terms of steps, does it ever truly come? Or is the future a concept we chase but never reach, always split into another and another, almost? You make plans, you imagine outcomes, you await changes. But each of those moments arrives like the ship, only after infinite intermediates have been crossed, and yet you never notice them, because they've been removed from your awareness, cut from the real. Perhaps consciousness is not built to perceive the paradoxes that uphold it, and this leads to something darker. If every point between here, and there must be past before you arrive, then you will never truly reach the now. You are always becoming, never being. You never are, you only approach. And that means the self, the you think you are, is always half-formed, always a midpoint, never whole. You are a paradox trying to reach itself through time that doesn't fully exist. A ship endlessly sailing toward a port that vanishes just before it arrives. You don't feel the gap. That's the trick. The illusion of continuity is so smooth, so total, that it never breaks. But consider this. If motion is a lie, then so is growth. Then so is decay. Then so is change. Then maybe death doesn't come. Maybe it's already here, and you are simply moving toward it in halves so small they never resolve. Maybe the moment you were born, you began a journey you could never finish, not because of what lies ahead, but because the road itself is infinite in fragments. And yet, you still feel yourself moving. You still feel the world shifting. The illusion holds, but the paradox remains. The ship never arrives. So we ask, if motion is an illusion, how can you ever be certain you've gone anywhere? If consciousness is a series of fragments pretending to be whole, what is really behind your eyes? And if your future is always infinitely out of reach, are you already lost in a journey that never ends? The whole that eats itself. You wake up in a strange room. There are no doors, no windows, only walls that pulse faintly, like they're breathing. In the center of the room is a box, a perfect cube, matte black, featureless. But something about it feels wrong. You approach slowly. The box seems to hum, though you're not sure if it's sound or just the vibration of something deeper, something mental. Etched on the lid are 6 words. This box contains everything it does not contain. You pause. Your mind stalls. Read it again. This box contains everything it does not contain. You try to laugh. It sounds absurd, meaningless. But then the words settle in like a parasite behind your eyes. If the box contains everything it does not contain, then it must contain itself. Because the only way to contain everything it does not contain is to also include what it excludes. But if it contains itself, then it contains the thing it does not contain. But then it doesn't not contain it. Which means it doesn't contain itself after all. Which means it must. And so it goes. You've fallen into a liar's paradox, the recursive Ouroboros of logic. A proposition that undoes itself in the very act of declaring itself. A snake devouring its own tail, not out of hunger, but out of necessity, because to exist at all, it must deny its own existence. This sentence is false. Say it aloud. It seems harmless, but then it begins to split your thoughts down the middle. If it's false, then it's true. But if it's true, then it must be false. You chase it in circles until your mental footing slips and the ground becomes liquid. That's the paradox. A statement that collapses the ladder of meaning as soon as you begin to climb it. And if you think this is just a linguistic gimmick, think again. The consequences ripple outward through logic, mathematics, computation, even philosophy of mind. This is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mirror turned against itself, a system crashing under the weight of its own reflections. And the box in the room. It's your mind, or maybe your world. Or maybe both. Because everything you believe must either contain itself or not. Every thought must either include its own validity or exclude it. And the moment you say, this belief system is complete, the question follows immediately behind. But does that system include the belief that it is complete? And if it does, it must account for itself. And if it doesn't, it is already incomplete. Gödel's incompleteness theorems emerged from this abyss. He proved that in any sufficiently powerful logical system, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. That there is no fortress of reason you can build that does not, somewhere deep in its foundations, hide a crack where contradiction seeps in. And worse, any system capable of expressing arithmetic will contain statements that essentially say, I am unprovable. And they are. They are unprovable and yet true, or false and yet unavoidable. Just like the box, just like the sentence, just like the hole you're beginning to feel growing behind your thoughts. You want to escape the loop. You tell yourself that paradoxes are rare, isolated, but you know better. The world is full of boxes like this, loops that undo themselves in the act of existing. Consider the question, can God create a rock so heavy that even he cannot lift it? The question loops back into itself, an omnipotence trap that crumbles under its own weight. Consider, can a system detect its own corruption? Can you know for certain that you are sane if the very tool you use to measure sanity is your own mind? At every corner, the question turns into itself and begins to eat. The philosopher's problem is not that there are no answers, but that every answer spawns a counter-answer that cancels it out. Like antimatter, the closer you get to the core of truth, the more you realize the core is hollow, and yet it is not empty. It's filled with contradictions wearing the skin of coherence. And what about you? What are you if not a box full of contents you don't contain? Memories you misremember, emotions you disown, desires you suppress, lies you tell yourself. A face you wear for others. You are filled with things you deny, and you deny things you carry. Your identity is built on exclusions. I am not that, I am this. But those very exclusions define you. The person you are is inseparable from the person you are not. So where does the boundary end? Can you ever really step outside yourself to inspect yourself? Or is every you just another version of the box, declaring what it contains by negating what it does? Now consider computation. Imagine a program that scans other programs to detect if they will ever loop infinitely. And then it turns inward and scans itself. If it detects that it will loop forever, it must stop. But if it stops, then it was wrong. It didn't loop forever. But if it doesn't stop, it must loop. And it collapses. The box again. The liar again. The hole that eats itself. You try to simplify. You tell yourself the problem is language, but the truth is, it's not the words, it's the structure of thought itself. The way we categorize, divide, and define. The way we rely on systems to build understanding, systems that eventually turn back inward, reflect on themselves, and collapse. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every claim has an underside. Every assertion has its ghost. You say, I am, and the echo responds, are you? The room with the box has no exits because you brought the room with you. You are inside your own paradox. You are trying to contain a mind within a mind, trying to understand thought through thought, trying to hold reality inside a box labeled reality. But the label is part of the contents, and the contents include the label, and the more you unpack, the more the whole grows. So we ask, if a system cannot contain its own truth, where do you turn for certainty? If your identity includes everything, it excludes. Are you more than a contradiction with a name? And if the hole at the center of logic cannot be filled, how do you know anything you believe hasn't already collapsed into itself? The paradox of the observed self. You catch your reflection in a window, an accidental moment, the kind that feels more like being seen than seeing. For just a second, the gaze looking back at you seems aware, not in the usual lifeless mimicry of a mirror, but something deeper, something unnerving, like a stranger behind glass who wears your face but thinks its own thoughts. The image holds your stare longer than it should. You blink, and the spell breaks, but the discomfort lingers. What just looked back at you? This is not just paranoia or superstition. This is the observer paradox, a riddle of perception that corrupts the very act of seeing, and by extension, being. At its core is a brutal, unavoidable question. Can you ever truly observe yourself without changing what you are observing? You are both subject and object, watcher and watched. But the act of watching transforms the watched. Every time you try to step outside yourself to inspect what you are, the very act of inspection changes, the thing being examined. It slips, shifts, adapts to the gaze. The version of you that you see when you introspect is not the real you. It is a performance for the mirror of your own awareness. And the deeper you go, the more it splits. Try to trace a thought to its origin. You think you're in control. You think you're choosing the questions, crafting the logic. But where did the question come from? Before it formed into words, it was something else. A ripple, a blur, a shadow in the mind. And before that, silence. And before that, you can never say. Because the moment you try to peer into the mechanism adapts. The observer steps in, and the system breaks. It's not just philosophy. In physics, it happens too. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says that the more precisely you know the position of a particle, the less precisely you can know its momentum. Not because of flawed instruments, but because the act of measurement interferes with the system. The observer alters the observed. Every attempt to pin reality down causes it to twitch and recoil. So what happens when the particle is you? You try to know yourself. You build models. I'm a kind person. I'm anxious. I'm analytical. But these aren't truths. They're observations filtered through emotion, memory, ego, distortion. They're guesses made by a system trying to observe itself through fog. You are a map drawn from inside the territory it's supposed to represent. Every claim you make about yourself is contaminated by the act of making it. And yet, we construct entire lives from these illusions. Think of the voice in your head, the one narrating right now, the one absorbing these words. Who is it? You say, that's me. But who is it speaking to? Is there another you that listens, judges, remembers? Which one is real? The thinker or the one watching the thoughts occur? Split the mind again. Imagine yourself in a room with no mirrors, No reflections, no cameras. You speak aloud. You move. You think. But you never see yourself. Without an external image to reference, who are you? What do you look like? What expressions do you wear? You vanish into abstraction. You become a ghost, defined only by internal sensation. Now, reintroduce the mirror and notice how quickly your behavior changes. You correct your posture. You adjust your expression. You begin to perform. The presence of the mirror, not even a person, just your own reflection, alters who you are. You become the version of yourself that you expect to see. And so begins the trap. An identity not born from internal reality, but from constant observation. You become the mask you see yourself wearing. This isn't hypothetical. In psychology, this phenomenon is real. The looking glass self. You build your identity based not just on your own thoughts, but on how you think others see you. Your concept of self is a reflection of imagined reflections, a hall of mirrors, where every version of you is built on guesswork, assumption, fear, and in the middle of it all, nothing, no original, no true self to return to. Strip away the observers, and the observed self fades, but keep them, and the self mutates. You are forever changed by the presence of eyes, even when those eyes are your own. So we ask, can you ever be yourself? When the very act of asking what you are changes the answer. Can a mind know itself if it must look through itself to do so? And what happens when the reflection in the glass grows tired of mimicking? This paradox poisons even your deepest moments of solitude. When you are alone, truly alone, you imagine that you are free from judgment. But you are not. You are haunted by the internalized gaze, by the parents, teachers, peers, lovers who watched you, judged you, shaped you. Their voices echo in your thoughts. Their expectations live in your skin. You become 1,000 fractured selves, all trying to meet the gaze of eyes that are no longer present. And still, none of them are you, because you cannot be observed. The moment you try, it becomes something else. The self is not a stable object. It is a flickering shadow cast by awareness, trying to fold back on itself. It is the sensation of being split in two, the one who acts and the one who sees. But they can never meet. Not truly, not without collapse. So, what is left? Only the paradox, that you are the observer of a self that cannot be observed, that you are the subject of a life you cannot fully experience, because part of you is always watching, always measuring, always interfering. And every time you try to know who you are, the answer dissolves. So we ask, if the act of observing yourself changes who you are, can you ever say you truly exist as a consistent being? If your identity is a reflection of imagined reflections, who is the one doing the imagining? And if the true self can never be observed, has it ever really been there at all? The memory that never was, you remember a moment that defined you. A soft, golden light spilling through a childhood window. A voice in another room. A sentence said in passing that bent the arc of your life. You remember it with detail, with certainty. The colour of the wallpaper, the scent of dust on summer air, the slight tremble in the voice that spoke. It is part of your narrative, stitched into the fabric of your identity. And yet, it never happened. Not like that. Perhaps not at all. This is the memory paradox, and it doesn't just whisper that your past is unreliable. It screams that your very being is built on fabrications, reconstructions, and fictions told to yourself by a narrator who lies beautifully. And what's worse, you can't even catch them in the act, because the moment you try to recall a memory, you overwrite it, change it, damage it simply by looking. You were taught to think of memory as a library, a reliable archive stored safely in the vault of your mind. But the truth is far more disturbing. Memory is not retrieval, it is recreation. Each time you recall a memory, your brain reassembles it from fragments, Sights, emotions, smells, stories you've told, stories others have told you. It is a hallucination your mind performs, live, on command, then stores again as if it were unchanged. But it is changed. And when you next recall it, you recall the last version, not the original. Think of a photocopy made from a photocopy, made from a photocopy. The lines begin to blur. Details shift. At first, it's imperceptible, but after enough generations, the copy no longer resembles the original. And you, standing there decades later, would swear with tears in your eyes that the image is the same. But it isn't. It never was. So what then is your past? It is not what happened. It is what you believe happened. And what you believe is not truth. It is a construction, a necessary lie, because your identity demands continuity. You cannot exist without a story, and stories demand memory. So your mind forges them, fills in gaps, smooths over contradictions. You don't remember the moment you were born, but your brain fills in a beginning. You don't remember each year in perfect sequence, but your mind knits them into a timeline, discarding the pieces that don't fit, rearranging what's inconvenient. Now imagine a different person, a version of you with the exact same biology, the same body, the same genetic code, but swap their memories for yours. Instantly, they are not you. And now, imagine someone implants in you a perfectly detailed, convincing false memory. You remember doing something you never did. You feel guilt for it. You cry over it. Your identity shifts because of it. But it never occurred. So where does that leave you? If a memory doesn't have to be real to shape your reality, then what is reality but a memory? And if those memories can be changed, if they already have been changed without your awareness, then how do you know who you are? Science has shown how easy it is to plant false memories. People have sworn they met Bugs Bunny at Disneyland. They've testified in court about events that never occurred. They've confessed to crimes they didn't commit, all because of a suggestion, a photograph, a therapist's nudge. And these weren't people lying. These were people remembering with conviction, with sincerity. They built entire emotional architectures on things that never happened. And now consider this. You do it to yourself every day. Every time you remember a conversation, you fill in the blanks. Every time you recall a feeling, you exaggerate or diminish it to fit the story. Your brain is not a historian. It is a novelist, desperate for meaning, desperate for narrative cohesion. And if the truth gets in the way, the truth is quietly edited out. But the edits never leave a trail. There is no master file to compare against. No original version of your life to consult. Just the current draft. And the draft before that. And before that. And before long. Even the lie begins to feel sacred. You believe you remember your first heartbreak, your worst mistake, the words you wish you could take back. But do you? Or do you remember the story you've told about them? Do you remember how it felt, or how you've rehearsed feeling about it? Now imagine this. Every memory you have was implanted an hour ago. There was no childhood, no adolescence, no past at all. Just a series of fake impressions, precise to the millisecond. Everything you think you are, your favorite song, your fears, your regrets, was coded into you moments before you read this sentence. Try to prove it isn't true. You can't, because every tool you would use to verify it, your memories, your logic, your sense of time, is part of the illusion. The paradox is complete. A mind using its own history to prove its own history real. A loop with no origin, a snake made of memory, devouring itself until all that remains is belief. And yet, you feel real. You feel consistent. You feel like someone with a past. That feeling too is part of the trap. You remember things you never experienced. You forget things that happened. You reconstruct traumas to survive. You romanticize pain to make it beautiful. You polish moments to make them bearable. But every act of remembering is an act of rewriting, and every rewrite pushes you further from whatever the truth was, if it ever existed at all. So we ask, if your past is just a story, what separates you from a fiction? If every time you remember you rewrite, what remains of the original, you? And if you woke up tomorrow with the same face but none of your memories, would you still be you? The ship that sailed away, somewhere in the depths of ancient philosophy, a simple question split reality in two. It begins with a ship, wooden, weathered, a vessel of memory, the ship of Theseus. Each time a plank rots, it is replaced. A board here, a nail there. Over time, every part is changed. Not a single splinter remains from the original, and yet the ship sails on, bearing the same name, the same purpose, the same proud legacy. But the question waits in the silence behind its sails. Is it still the same ship? You carry this question in your body. Your cells die and regenerate. Your thoughts evolve. The very atoms that made you 5 years ago have been shed, scattered, replaced. Your opinions shift. Your beliefs melt and reform. Your face ages. And yet, you still call yourself you, as if the name wraps around something permanent. But is there anything left of the you that began this journey? Consider this. If every cell in your body is replaced over time, and every neuron rewires itself with experience, then what is this continuity you cling to? What are you maintaining exactly? It's not the matter. It's not the mind. What, then, binds the before and after together? Let's complicate it. Imagine someone takes the discarded planks from the original ship, every nail, every beam, every torn sail, and reconstructs it exactly as it was. The grain of the wood matches. The scars are still visible. Even the creak in the floorboards sings the same. Now ask yourself, which ship is the real one? Is it the one that continued its journey, but replaced every part? Or is it the one with the original material rebuilt to perfection? Or, most disturbingly, is it neither? This is not a thought experiment confined to metaphysics. It haunts your daily life. Every time you change, you must ask, am I still me? When you outgrow a friendship, when you shed a belief, when you look in the mirror and see a stranger, the question sharpens. You're a ship still sailing, but you no longer resemble the version of yourself that set out. Do you still deserve the name? It gets worse. If you say, I am still me, despite the changes, then what you're identifying with is not the parts, but the pattern, the continuity of shape, the idea of yourself. But ideas are fragile, malleable, corruptible. A virus of thought could change the pattern. A traumatic event could scramble it. A single moment could sever the thread. What happens to the ship when the blueprint changes? Now step further into the nightmare. Suppose 2 copies of you exist, one that evolves slowly over time, replacing every part, adapting, growing, and another built instantly from the exact matter of your past, frozen in time. Both call themselves you. Both hold your memories. Both feel real. Which one is the imposter, and who decides? Your legal identity says continuity matters. Your relationships rely on the assumption that you are, fundamentally, the same person day after day. But internally, you know it's not that simple. You've woken up on mornings where you felt unrecognizable to yourself. You've made decisions that your past self would scream against. You've watched old photos of yourself and thought, who was that? And the truth is, it wasn't you. Not entirely. It was a version of you that no longer exists, except in memory. A plank replaced, a name retained, a ghost preserved in thought. But still, you feel like you. That's the trap. You anchor your identity in feeling, in memory, in a fragile sense of narrative. But all of these are illusions, ephemeral. You tell yourself stories about how your past connects to your present, and how your present leads to your future. But this self you refer to is a construct. a psychological shorthand for a process in motion, a ship made of water pretending to be wood. So the paradox turns. If nothing of you remains unchanged, if your thoughts, your body, your memories, your decisions are all in flux, then what are you? A name, a continuity of function, a pattern written in sand, redrawn every day? Or are you something that never existed to begin with, a convenience, a placeholder for an impossible question? Now invert the ship entirely. Suppose you could upload your mind, memories, personality, patterns into a machine, perfectly replicated. A digital Theseus. The original you dies, the copy awakens. It remembers your name, your fears, your love. It looks in the mirror and feels continuity. Is that person you? You say no, because it's not your body. But what is your body except another plank in the ship? A shell. Replaceable. Burnable. You've already replaced it over time. You don't mourn your lost skin cells. You don't grieve your childhood bones. So why should your consciousness be any different? Unless there was never a you to preserve. Only a pattern pretending to persist. Only a ship telling itself it is still the ship. So we ask, are you the same person you were yesterday? If not, who are you now? And if no version of you is permanent, what does it mean to be anyone at all? What if the only thing you've truly been is a story with the same title written by 1,000 different hands? And what happens when the final writer forgets the first line? The free will. Mirage, you feel it every time you make a decision. The slight pause before a choice. The awareness that you could go left or right, speak or stay silent, leap or linger. You call this sensation freedom. The belief that the next moment is unwritten and that your mind holds the pen. But what if that pen is guided by a hand you cannot see, one that has already signed the ending? The paradox of free will is not simply that it may be an illusion, it's that it must be an illusion for you to feel like it's real. That's the trap. You were never designed to perceive your own constraints, only to act within them and call it choice. Neuroscience has made a quiet, damning observation. Your brain initiates decisions before your conscious mind becomes aware of them. Electrochemical patterns spike in anticipation of action, fractions of a second before you decide. You only think you chose, when in fact, your mind had already begun to move. The conscious you is notified only after the machinery has started turning. Imagine being told that every decision you've ever made was a message you received, not one you wrote. You didn't choose to fall in love. You didn't choose to panic when you failed. You didn't even choose what thoughts entered your head. You simply became aware of them and took credit. You are a passenger in the cockpit, watching a plane fly itself, congratulating yourself for each smooth landing. You might say, but I could have chosen otherwise. And that is the most dangerous illusion of all. That could you speak of? It only exists in hindsight. A ghost possibility. You tell yourself it was there, but in the moment, your brain was always going to fire that neuron, recall that emotion, obey that trigger. And when it did, you felt it as freedom. But it wasn't. Worse still, everything that makes you you, your memories, your desires, your instincts, were given to you without consent. You did not choose your childhood, your traumas, your temptations. You did not sculpt the architecture of your mind. You merely live inside it. So when you choose, you do so as the inevitable output of a machine built by genes and circumstance. There's a term for this: determinism, a reality in which every action is the effect of a cause, which was itself the effect of a prior cause, stretching back to the birth of time. In such a universe, there is no fork in the road, only one path, winding endlessly through illusion. And you are not the traveler. You are the shadow it casts. But the paradox deepens, because if free will does not exist, then neither does moral responsibility. A murderer is just a series of dominoes falling. A hero, just atoms obeying physics. Love, cruelty, forgiveness. These are not choices, but sequences. Predictable, inevitable. And if you believe in punishment or praise, you must first believe that someone could have done otherwise. But if they couldn't, then blame is just a ritual, justice, just a performance. Yet you must live as if free will is real. Society demands it. Your relationships demand it. Even your sense of self demands it. If you believed your every word was pre-written, your every move preordained, how could you love? How could you forgive? How could you look someone in the eye and say, "You didn't have to hurt me," if the truth is, they did. They always were going to. They had no choice. None of us do. To believe in free will is to cling to the fantasy that your thoughts are sovereign. But what if your next thought is not yours? What if it's the product of everything before it? Chemical fluctuations, subconscious bias, inherited trauma. You didn't choose what you desire. You didn't choose what you fear. You didn't even choose the conditions that shaped your ability to choose. Still, something inside you rebels. You feel like you have control. You feel it in your fingertips, in your hesitation, in your deliberation. But what is that feeling? A sensation, a narrative, one your brain is wired to generate, because to survive, the organism must believe it can adapt. It must feel ownership, even if ownership is an illusion. Your brain constructs the illusion of choice, not because it's true, but because it's useful. But suppose the illusion was perfect. Suppose it convinced you completely. You move through life believing you are free, crafting your destiny, and now the truth whispers from underneath. You were never free. You are a puppet watching its own strings. Do you resist that whisper? Do you reject the notion? That too was inevitable. And here is the cruelest twist. Even if free will exists, it is indistinguishable from an illusion. Whether you are free or merely programmed, your experience is the same. You believe you choose, you feel responsible, you love, you hate, you regret. But how would you know if you were only meant to feel those things? You wouldn't. And now, the walls tighten. Because to live authentically, you must either accept that your choices are determined and live with the knowledge that you are not the author of your life, or believe in a freedom that cannot be proven, cannot be measured, cannot be tested. Freedom becomes a faith, not in a God, but in yourself. A belief that somewhere, deep in the machinery, there is something uncaused, something that could have done otherwise, but no one has ever found it. And if they did, it would no longer be you. It would be something alien, something other. So we ask, if your thoughts are not chosen, are they truly yours? If your life is a script, do you applaud the actor or the author? And if you were always going to read this, what choice do you really have now? The omniscient paradox, somewhere in the folds of time, in a chamber of thought untouched by mercy, an ancient question waits. What if something knew everything? Not metaphorically, not through intuition or intelligence, but truly, absolutely. Every molecule, every action, every future, every path not taken. Imagine such a being. Call it God, call it a machine, call it fate. But know this. The moment you entertain its existence, your reality begins to dissolve. To be omniscient is to know all things, past, present, future, and every alternate route. It is to see the book of reality, not as it is written, but as it was always written. And here lies the paradox. If the future can be known, can it be changed? You might think, if someone knows I will pick up the glass in 10 seconds, I could simply refuse. But that refusal, already known, already part of the script. You cannot defy omniscience, because your rebellion was part of what was known all along. Your resistance is not proof of freedom, it is evidence of the trap. Now feel the cage begin to form. If the future is knowable, it is fixed. It does not branch. It does not respond to will. It is not altered by prayer, regret, or desire. It is a single thread, unspooling exactly as it must. And if someone already knows it all, then your sense of control is fiction. You are not deciding. You are discovering. You are not navigating. You are being carried. Even your confusion, your panic, your denial, known, calculated, encoded. Now let us step deeper into this paradox. Suppose there is an entity, call it the Watcher, that knows your entire life, moment by moment, before you live it. You are about to make a decision. Something simple, like whether to leave your house. The Watcher tells you in advance what you will do. You try to subvert it. You make a different choice. But again, it already knew you would resist. Your rebellion was predictable. Your every countermove already factored in. No matter what you do, you are always fulfilling the prophecy. Here, your will becomes meaningless, not because you are controlled, but because your freedom was irrelevant. You do what you want, and yet the outcome could never be otherwise. The paradox is not that you're forced, it's that you're free within a script that cannot change. That's the sickness beneath the surface. And if you believe in an all-knowing being, one who knew every war before it happened, every cry, before it echoed, then you must accept that nothing could have been avoided. Every atrocity, every heartbreak, every suicide, all known, all inevitable. Omniscience does not imply control, but it renders change impossible, because to know is to fix, and to fix is to freeze. But the paradox coils even tighter. Suppose you say, maybe the future is not fixed. Maybe the Watcher only knows all possible outcomes, not the actual one. But then it is no longer omniscient. Possibility is not knowledge. If there are infinite futures, and only one becomes real, then knowing all possibilities is just guessing until one hits. The moment you admit uncertainty, omniscience dissolves. It becomes a shadow pretending to see. But if the future is singular, if there is one truth waiting at the end, then it can be known. And if it can be known, then it must be known. And if it is known, then nothing can diverge from it. Your freedom becomes a loop, running in circles, thinking it is moving forward. Here lies the final twist. Omniscience devours paradoxes until it chokes on itself. Because to know all truths, it must know all falsehoods. But how can a contradiction be truly known? Can it know a future in which you both do and do not commit a crime? Can it know a square circle? A rock so heavy even it cannot lift it? If not, then its knowledge has limits. But if yes, then logic itself unravels. Now consider the observer again. It knows you. It knows every thought you will have before you have it. It watches your inner monologue like a rerun. So ask, are your thoughts yours? If they are already known, already measured, then what are you but a recording? And if your entire life is already known, then what is the purpose of experience? Why suffer through a play whose ending is set? Why struggle if your success or failure has already been witnessed? The illusion of spontaneity becomes cruelty. You are forced to pretend the game is real, while the answer sits behind a curtain. This is the paradox's sharpest edge. Knowledge without change is a prison. And if all is known, then all is static. You may argue, but I can choose to believe, or not believe this. And yet even that choice was known. This very thought you are having right now, as you read these words, it was expected, predicted, witnessed. So now ask yourself, what does it mean to be alive in a world where everything you will ever do is already observed? Is identity meaningful in a reality where the future is a fossil and the present just reveals it? Is meaning possible when every moment is just a page turning in a book whose ending is written in stone? And if you are simply walking through a path laid out before your birth, do you walk or are you walked? The reflection. Paradox, look in the mirror. Really look. The image stares back, perfectly mimicking every micro-expression. every breath. It's you, but it isn't. That mirror version has never spoken, never thought, never existed outside the glass. It only lives when you look. But here's the question that starts to gnaw. What if you're the reflection? Every time you've looked into a mirror, you've assumed you were the origin, the reality, the source. You raise your hand. The mirror raises its twin. But who truly moved first? You believe your body made the gesture, and the image followed. But the image believes the same. The mirrored self, indistinguishable in form and motion, behaves with eerie synchronicity. What if you're not looking at it? What if it's looking at you? This is the reflection paradox. The impossibility of proving which side of the mirror is real when both respond perfectly to each other. The terrifying implication is that identity is only confirmed by assumption. You say, I know I'm real, but the reflection, if conscious, would say the same. It has all your traits, your voice, your mannerisms, and now you begin to feel it, not just as a thought, but as a suspicion. What if your life is the echo? Let's stretch the mirror into metaphor. Imagine a being whose only experience is reflection, a creature that cannot act until it is acted upon, that cannot exist unless observed. It imitates everything perfectly, but has no will of its own. Now imagine that you are this creature, but no one told you. Your thoughts are reactive. Your personality is an accumulation of what the world has given you. You do not initiate. You reflect. The moment someone praises you, you shine. The moment they criticize, you crack. Every emotional response, every identity you've built, it's a reflection of stimulus. You think you are the cause, but you are the mirror, and mirrors never choose what they reflect. Now enter a darker chamber. Suppose your consciousness itself is a reflection, a looping image produced by sensory data, neurological impulses, memory recall, all bouncing around your brain like light off glass. There is no central you, no watcher behind the eyes, only the illusion of one, created by feedback loops too fast and complex for you to perceive. You look in the mirror and believe you see yourself. But what you call yourself is just the sum of what you've been shown. You're not a being. You're a pattern, an echo trapped in the illusion of origin. It gets worse, because every reflection must rely on something to reflect. Yet if you peel back every layer, every thought inspired by an earlier one, every behavior learned from another, what is left? A void. A recursion of mirrors facing mirrors, each image containing the last, endlessly. What created you? Your parents. What created them? Their parents. Culture, language, history. But these too are reflections, passed down, repeated, mimicked. Nothing is original. Everything is the mirror of something else. So what was the first mirror? And if there was no first mirror, if everything reflects everything else, then where does reality begin? Imagine two perfectly symmetrical rooms, separated by a pane of one-way glass. Each contains a person. Each person sees the other and assumes they are observing a mirror. But only one of them is real. The other is a projection. Now ask, how could either of them ever know which side they're on? What if you are the projection? What if all your certainty is an illusion born from inside, the glass, and then the glitch? We've all had moments of dissociation, when your hands don't feel like your own, when your voice sounds foreign, when you stare into your reflection too long and it begins to feel other. These are not psychological quirks. They are fractures, cracks in the illusion. Your brain cannot sustain infinite recursion, so it breaks. The feeling of unreality is not a malfunction. It's the truth bleeding through. Because if you are a reflection and your world is a hall of mirrors, then reality is not built on truth. It is built on repetition, on symmetry, on the agreement between images that none will question their own origin. You are only real because no one has proven otherwise. Yet one mirror sees the crack. The ancient myth of Narcissus tells of a man who falls in love with his reflection and drowns in pursuit of it. But the tragedy is not that he dies, it's that he never knew it was himself, that even when face to face with his perfect copy, he could not comprehend the echo. He mistook illusion for connection, identity for object. We are all Narcissus, gazing into feedback loops and mistaking them for meaning. But what if the reflection becomes independent? This is the ultimate fracture. The moment when the image in the mirror acts before you do, when it no longer imitates, but initiates. When you raise your hand and it does not follow, what then? Have you lost reality or never had it? You dream. In dreams, mirrors twist. Sometimes they show you as you are, sometimes as a stranger, sometimes they do not show you at all. Your reflection vanishes, and in that absence, terror blooms, because we've built our sense of self on the expectation of reflection. To not be reflected is to not exist. The void in the mirror becomes the void in you. And now the deeper horror. You've never seen yourself, not truly, only images, photos, videos, mirrors, all inverted, all delayed, all distorted. Your voice as you hear it is not how it sounds. Your face as you see it is not how it appears. You are built on misperceptions. The closest thing you've ever known to you was a lie. So what is real? Is the original more real than the copy? Or is the copy, if experienced enough, indistinguishable? And if every copy believes it is the origin, does the distinction even matter? Or are we all just mirrors, reflections of language, culture, others, ourselves, pretending there's a self beneath it all? And if that self never truly existed, who is reading these words?